Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for joining me. Going to talk about the election a little bit tonight, kind of casually. I was going to get all these charts together and go through the figures, but I just don't have time for that. So I'm just going to kind of talk about it casually and go through everything that's gone on with the results in the Irish election. The very exciting results of the same thing, basically. And what there is to take away from that and stuff. So, yeah, I didn't talk about it. I actually didn't even tweet about it for like a day or two. I was just following everything and liking stuff on X, paying attention to it. And then someone asked me, did a welfare check on me on Twitter, being like, is Garrod Murphy alive? And then it dawned on me that perhaps I should be commenting on it because I'm meant to be a sort of a commentator. And I actually just forgot that. I was too busy scrolling away and being a content consumer, and forgot that I might, I'm meant to say stuff as well, aren't I? But to me, it all just seems, for those of you who are paying attention, you should know what the crack is already. But I mean, I could do the long story short or go through my notes. What it seems like to me is already, so Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are back in basically with some sort of junior partner, some independents maybe, or perhaps some people are speculating on the outside chance Ain 2, or more likely just a few independents, or maybe they'll team up with Labour or Social Democrats or whatever. In a way, I'm kind of like, on the big picture, who cares? I see Imperator, Scriptorum, and Last Trugel, and all the usual lads in the chat there. Good to see you all. I've kind of forgotten how to live stream, how to talk, but so yeah, there's like little tidbits. The overall picture is boring. It just is what it is, like another Irish election with the usuals in power and all of that. I suppose where I could like actually add something is I think the broader conversation, well, 2 points. One is on the nationalist or so-called so-called far right or whatever, this kind of thing. The discussion about whether this election was a big bust, a big failure, whether it's quite positive if you look at it a different way, the vote share grew and la la la. There's a kind of whole discourse around that to be had. And then there's also, I think, an interesting conversation to be had about, and I'm going to speak loosely on these things, no facts, they'll quote that, but like no fact sheets out in front of me. I just want to kind of speak to it extemporaneously a little bit, without going through figures and charts and all that. The other aspect is a conversation about just Irish democracy or the Irish democratic system. And it's one of these things, again, there's a discourse around it where some people say, like that meme goes, the people are retarded, democracy is, ruled by, for, and of the retarded or whatever, and the electorate are sheep and idiots, and what else? Democracy is a sham, blah, 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 all of that. Some people kind of go with that, and it's obviously a convenient thing to say if you don't do well in elections. Others reject that and say, no, if you'd fail in that system for all its flaws, you don't point your ire at the electorate. For one, it doesn't look good, and for two, it's just a bad attitude. You work within the system you have, and you sort of reconcile with it and figure it out and beat the system, play the system, use it, as opposed to throwing your toys out of the pram and giving out about it. So that's a kind of competing narrative or discourse kind of thing on that. But I'm not sort of jumping in on that to say everyone's a dumb boomer sheep, they voted wrong or whatever. I'm not saying that necessarily, but what I will say is there is the Irish, say whatever you want to say about democracy and how it works, just within those terms, the Irish democracy or electorate or whatever you want to call it is very depressed. You can see that, and there's a sort of a apathy there, and it's just very clear. There's also a very obvious social inequality, let's say, or socioeconomic inequality, we'll say, going on there. If you look through some of the figures between the aforementioned, let's say, boomers, the older generation and the younger generation, and also between the haves and the have-nots. As I don't think he'll mind me pointing out last through Gale there. I'm sort of lifting this phrasing from him, but it's just true, is that it's something along the lines of a third of people are doing very well, a third of people are treading water just fine, sort of they're doing okay. So yeah, a third are doing very well, a third they're not doing well, but they're getting by, and a third of people are absolutely drowning in shit, basically. And that's sort of a phenomenon. And then, of course, that phenomenon is mixed up with the age thing as well. Of course, that's heavily age skewed, where the boomers, and this is just like people say, criticize me for talking about boomers. It's just a reality. This point is that, and it's very pronounced in Ireland, is this have and have not gap is so strongly cut by age, not exclusively cut by age, but strongly cut by age, that you sort of have this, and I see it all the time, just sort of in my life, is that there is, and I complain about it often on these streams, is that you expect people to get a little bit wealthier and more consolidated when they get older in a country. I'll get back to election stuff in a sec, but you expect people to get older and more consolidated, or more consolidated and well off with their age. Naturally, you accumulate resources throughout your life, and then by the latter end, you're comfortable, and maybe people who are in their 20s or whatever are still scratching and struggling, trying to make their way. And that's perennial. That's always been the case. To some extent, that's natural. But it's sort of obscene in Ireland, where, and I'm speaking in extremes here, of course, extreme ends of the spectrum, but to paint a picture, but what you have in Ireland is a sort of that phenomenon is out of control a little bit, where yes, you have very rich young people and you have some very poor and destitute old people, but as a exception. But generally speaking, the older people seem to kind of have the money. And I'm not talking about brain surgeons here, people who reinvented, the atom or split the atom or whatever. I'm talking about ordinary people who worked as, a bus driver, in a canteen in a school, whatever, anyone, a lot of boomers who just kind of went along, now will be in their 60s and 70s and that, and have I've often pointed out, it sounds like sour grapes or whatever, but it's just it's real. They have the 242 car, they have the best health insurance, they have their property obviously is well paid off, they can basically go out most days to a hotel and get something to eat, go on a cruise if they want to, this, that, and the other. And it's sort of historically unparalleled that a cross section of people, a subsection of a society, would sort of be able to live in such what could only be compared historically to like the life of obviously like an aristocrat or something from 200 years ago, where your life is just a daily thing of like you're way above what you need, and you're just sort of seeking a nice pleasurable day, and all these kind of things, that kind of lifestyle. And again, you might say that's exaggerated, but it is commonly a thing for these boomers. And like I say, very good health insurance, so they go to very good hospitals, they have a very good car, they have a very good house. If they have something wrong in their house that they need to fix, and the guy comes in and says, oh, that's going to be 10 grand, that's a bit of a problem, they go, right, just do it, or whatever. Then you have young people in their 20s, 30s, whatever, who literally don't have a house, they're working a job, they don't really have a pot to piss in, they can't really imagine having kids, they don't have enough for the likes of medical insurance, but they're not poor enough to get medical cards and all of that. So they worry about getting a toothache and this and that. And it's sort of almost Dickensian, That is the case for a big cross section of millennials. We see the rates of hidden homelessness and all of that. So you have this like divide where, and I only point that out, and people might say it's cartoonish, like I'm picking extremes from both examples. But the fact that those exist at all are relevant. And the reason I pointed out as regards elections and socioeconomic bifurcation in Ireland is because you see younger people voting Sinn Féin. They believe Sinn Féin are the populist answer or whatever. And older people almost, religiously voting for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. And infamously, when they're asked outside of the polling centres, everyone was posting this, all of the boomers saying, I'll vote them again. I've voted them my whole life. I like the job they're doing. As far as I can see, they're doing a great job in all of this. And of course, if you're a 27-year-old in Ireland and you're on like you're on a grand salary, but nothing special, but traditionally it should have been a grand enough salary to have a pretty stable life. You're looking at that in disbelief. And of course, it does foster a lot of resentment. People just are watching that going, are we in the same reality? Are we living in the same world? I don't get it. And of course, that's the thing, is that you're not living in the same world, is that the average boomer, not a really rich person or not really poor, is, like I say, has very often has a new car, health insurance, nice house, easily fix their house, go on holidays, all these kind of things. They're checking all those boxes and they've got room to spare financially. Whereas the younger people are on the opposite end of that. And so that, I've often said that if you have that sort of divide, it's almost like one person lives in Moldova and the other person lives in Norway, or something like that. It's the equivalent of people genuinely living in not just different countries, because Ireland and England are different countries, but they're sort of quite similar part of the world, vaguely similar standards of living and stuff like that. So it's not just like living in different countries, but like living in different sort of stratospheres or different regions of the world, like comparing Singapore to Colombia or something, like you go from one place to another and the life is totally different. It's a totally different thing. And that's what you have among people. So you will end up with that thing where you end up shocked that how could so many people vote for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael when the world I see is crumbling around me, or all the people I know are, can't find a house, and they're 30 odd years old. It's not like they're 19 and they can't get a house. They're 30, 32, 35, 40. So you kind of go, where is the social fabric there, where the old people care about the young and the young about the old, and this sort of where we're all seeing the same picture, but we're not seeing the same picture. There is a very different set of frames for people to see, or lenses for people to see Ireland through. And so you end up with this sort of a strange result in these elections. And again, like I say, skewed by socioeconomics, age, and it's drastic. And it's sort of, I feel like it's affecting, it goes beyond elections. It's a sad thing in the society to see it a little bit, that gap. And what I feel sad about is it's not so much hate against the boomers individually, but it's almost like when you see them talking outside polling stations and living their lives, you kind of go, I just don't think they get it. I don't know. I don't think they get it. Like, if a lot of them will not have seen an emergency room in one of the worst hospitals, Limerick or somewhere like that in the country. They haven't, if you haven't spent 18 hours in one of them looking around the place, seeing it for what it is, but you've actually been in, I say the Beacon, but one of the nicer hospitals or private or something like that, for your outpatient appointments, and it all runs very smoothly. It's just a different world. So, but it is sad, because of course we should all be more familiar with each other. So yeah, you end up with this gap, and you have low voter turnout as well. I think this election brought the lowest voter turnout since, I believe, 1926, somewhere there. So people just don't care. So people aren't. Oh, that's the other thing, by the way. The voter turnout skews heavily by age as well, extremely heavily. I don't have the figures in front of me, but it goes something along the lines of 90% odd turnout for people over 65, thereabouts. And then if you go under 35, turnout is closer to 40 or something along those lines, where it's just totally polarized that way. And of course, there are a lot of boomers. And like I say, boomers are living, generally speaking, on a different planet, socioeconomically, to people who are, let's say, 28 years old. So they're all voting. The younger people aren't. Who's at fault? Are the younger people bad for not participating? You can't crib. You can't give out if you didn't vote. La 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 la. People have all these, like, I see people saying that kind of stuff, and it's like, well, it's not about that they can't complain and whatever. That's true if you want to look at it that way. But the deeper question is like, why aren't they coming out and voting? It's a very silly thing to go, oh, you can't afford a place to live. You can't afford to go see a dentist, or even if you could, you wouldn't get an appointment for 2 months or whatever. These things. Or you can't do all that, but you couldn't even be bothered to go out and vote. Because if you went out and voted, it would fix your problems or whatever. No, it all runs so much deeper than that. People obviously have psychically kind of picked up on this disenfranchisement going on, where they just don't feel like there's much of a point or whatever. There is no viable option. And they're, to some extent, they're correct. The whole thing is a bit of a charade and a sham. How long would you be voting for trying to get Sinn Féin into government, only to realize that really nothing's going to change because the country would structurally remain the same? I've seen some of Sinn Féin's policies. They might tinker with the budget here or there, give 5% more and less in this and that way, and change the rollout of X and Y service a bit, but structurally this country would remain the same. Something along the lines of just being a multinational run country, which is fine in itself. Bring tons of foreigners in, just kind of let the whole thing play out. Something along those lines, and just like naked corruption left, right, and center, and kind of haves and have-nots, and Sinn Féin as well, rhetorically, like if you actually listen to them, like how they sound the very same. So people don't even get the buoyancy that they would get with the Trump versus Kamala. And I mentioned this on a podcast recently with Keith Woods before the election. Even democracy as a stage play, where it's nothing's really going to change, but during the election there's a real competition of competing worldviews and ideas, and both sides are tribal, and one feels like they're going to change things for the better. You don't get that like from Sinn Féin or anything. So I don't know. I just think the low voter turnout is relevant. The other thing too is people have picked up on this, that a lot of the young people who would get energetic and maybe vote for something different and sort of stir the place up a bit, or stir the younger demographic up a bit, are gone. Almost like a zoological effect, where traditionally the people that leave are very often the more vitalistic and stronger ones. Not always, but that is obviously one of those things where people who just can't handle how drab things are, how depressed things are, will just get up and go to somewhere else. They won't just want a better life. There's a big phenomenon on YouTube now. I could get conspiratorial about this, but I'll just take it at face value, of, particularly in England, of young men saying that Britain is a dystopian hellscape, and I'm getting out of here. I'm going to Kuala Lumpur. I'm going wherever. And there's nothing you can do to fix England. It's ran by tyrants. They're just trying to bleed you dry. And I'm just getting out of here. And there's no bigger philosophy. Are you abandoning your country? Are you not? What about tyranny? What about fighting for what's right? What about being where you belong? All that stuff. They're going, listen, that's all rubbish, really, because there's nothing we can do anyway. If I stay here and I just keep going with it and I fight the system, or I do whatever, I'm just going to be ground up and destroyed anyway. So I'm just going to live my short time on this earth in the most maximized way possible. And I'm going to go to Thailand or whatever, or, Portugal or Costa Rica, whatever it is. I'm going to go do that and enjoy my life. I don't necessarily agree with all that, but the types of people who will go in for that are the types of people who have some sort of yearning in them to not be under the heel of like this awful thing. So, those are the types of people ideally you would want to stay, and we lose a lot of them. And I just believe that creates both within elections and democratic turnout and all of that, and just overall in the culture, this sort of steamy window, sort of just depressing, sad house. And I think that's what's getting the voter turnout down. It's not about, play your part or whatever. And of course, on the flip side, why do all of the boomers come out and vote in a way? Because they are actually, jubilant might not be the word, but whatever the opposite of depressed is, they're vibrant in their sort of willingness to go out and vote, because they feel like they're, obviously they come from a time when voter turnout was higher. They were raised in that culture more. They were raised in a culture that you felt like it was your duty to, you go to mass on Sunday and you do this and you do that. And when it comes to be voting, you go vote, because we're all sort of playing along with this whole thing. So to this day, still in the 90+%, they will turn out. And of course, I saw that euphoric. Someone said, yeah, euphoria might be a bit of a strong word as well, but I can't think of the word for it. But they're engaged and positive, and they want to take part in this thing, because why wouldn't you? The society sort of does the job for them. You know what I mean? So I want to vote in this democracy, in this society, in this economy. This I belong in this thing, and this works for me. So I'm going to go vote in it. I'm going to vote for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And there's the propaganda RT element too. I want to keep the ship on. What do they say? Like, oh well, they don't do everything perfect, but they're keeping the ship on the ocean or whatever. I'm terrible with the analogies. It's late. I'm tired, but they're keeping the show on the road, right? And again, the disbelief a 28-year-old they will have to that is to say, what the fuck are you talking about? What show on what road, right? And that's just the competing. They're seeing different things, and steadying the ship. Thanks, lads. But that's just something that's going on there, and it's kind of sad. The other thing too is, of course, yeah. So the young people are all voting like kind of Sinn Féin type of thing, naturally enough, and the olds are voting Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and that's just how it is. That's the basic, I suppose, rundown of the thing. You have, like, in some, it's a sort of it's just a very alienated, fractured society, both intergenerationally and economically and all of that. I've often said, kind of like, society itself is kind of, this sounds very angsty, goth type of thing to say, but like, the social fabric is sort of just in tatters a little bit, and that's why you have these different socioeconomic groupings just often living in totally different worlds. But yeah, I'll get into some specifics about the whole thing. Yeah, I think if you want more on this, and I'm not just lifting all these are thoughts I did have for myself, but it seems like today, every time I have an epiphany on the election or some idea about it, I go on Archiving Irish Diversity on Telegram, and I'm either getting an idea from him on his page, or I've had the idea, and no sooner have I had it than I go on and he's like fleshed it out in like exactly how I was thinking about it, but maybe a bit better. And go on there for some charts and graphs. He's got a lot of stuff. He's basically seeing it exactly the way I'm seeing it. Great place to go for just granular bits of analysis and all of that. But I'll just go on to my rudimentary notes here as well. Yeah, that's the state of Irish democracy, we'll call it, is fairly piss poor. And of course, well, this is something I could get onto more. The in a way why that is. There's so much to this. Like there's all that bifurcation, but it's also systematic. It's being done this way a little bit. It's being done this way a little bit where, and I discussed this with Keith when I spoke to him there recently, is that there is a how do I even get into this? There's such a control on discourse in this country, where, much like the steamy windowed sad box house that I spoke about a while ago, this sort of just really dull and really fervid kind of swampy atmosphere in Ireland, politically, culturally, all of that. And of course, it ends up feeding into who gets voted for and how it all works or whatever. I believe it even affects artistic, output, and so you just don't see much, but nothing compelling ever. or even conversations you have with people, you know, unless you're really trusting and in secret, maybe you can talk about stuff or get in there, but people just have no interest. It's a very damp atmosphere, we'll say. You know, that is, of course, by sort of design. You know, like if you go on one of these TV debate shows, or a more casual panel discussion, one of these 10 o'clock things where they all sit along with their legs folded or whatever, it's just always the same types of people. I saw Rory Hearn got elected wherever his constituency is. He's this guy, for example, to take him, who has been flogged non-stop by the media for years now. He wrote a book called Gaps, where he alleged to have solutions to the housing crisis, but desperately wouldn't mention immigration and all of that. Former kind of PBP, I don't know, is that Trotskyist, like far left type of thing, now remodeled as a clean cut, you know, takeaway latte cup holding, you know, moderate social democrat type of guy. Anyway, total regime darling. Every second time you turn on the television, he's there, and he's meant to be the answer to. He's not one of these stale people like Micheál Martin or Bertie Ahern. He's part of the, you know, blazer and jeans crew, takeaway latte, real solutions, a millennial thinker, not like these silly older people, who has real answers for a lost generation. And his heart goes out, his heart bleeds for all of the people who can't get houses, etc. And he's been on television like every other day. His book flogged in every shop. I don't think there necessarily would have been a huge appetite for the book. Maybe some, but like, you know, you don't just end up with your book all over the place, all of these promotions and all of that. And every single time they discuss housing, and they want to have the equivalent of the Rubber Bandits or one of these crew on to be like the dissenting voice on housing policy, it's your man. And of course, if you're going to be on the telly for 3 or 4 years all the time, being the God's you know, God sent solution to the housing crisis, well, you know, yeah, you're going to get the exposure, and you're kind of going to pick up votes, perhaps. But that's kind of how it is. And it's kind of similar to like if I'm in a supermarket and I see the, you know, the women's magazine section or whatever by the till, and I see it's like Women's Way or Ireland's Best or whatever it's called, and every time I look at those shelves, it's basically Lucy Kennedy, Miriam O'Callaghan got a new extension, Lucy Kennedy battles with, I don't know, some, you know, mild illness or whatever. And there is this, and that it sounds superficial, like I'm speaking sort of superficially, but that feeds back to politics as well. You don't get debate. You never get debate. The discussion on housing and immigration, which has like been central in Ireland for years now. All this talk about the so-called far right and the rest of it, and about immigration, and about, one poll says 80% of people are against immigration, another says it's 40. It varies, but it's rising and growing and huge and dominant. Never really anyone on about that. They'll have 50 million discussions about the far right and the dangerous rise of the far right and this and that, but never one of these alleged far rights to just sit there and say, well, if you're going to talk about someone, nameless phantom entity, all the time, then where is one of these people? I mean, if they're so prevalent or dangerous or any of that, where is he or they or it to just say their bit? And you can tell them they're wrong, and they can say they think them right and discuss it or whatever. Never any such thing. Just, you will have a panel show where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Sinn Féin and Paul Murphy and Rory Hearn and Miriam O'Callaghan and Lucy Kennedy and Podge and Rog, and they're all sitting there talking about how we're going to deal with immigration, right? Why isn't someone who is critical of immigration sitting there? No, that doesn't happen. So it's just, you know, it's kind of I have a list of like random things to talk about. I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm rambling or not, but you know, you don't even get much in the way of. And again, another thing I kind of mentioned when I was talking to Keith is, like, let's say a discussion about just, and you will get some on this, but a good discussion about data centers in Ireland, the prevalence of those, the toll that takes on our electricity grid, the fact that with like AI and all of that, I think I've read somewhere that every 90 days or something, the power consumption is doubling based in those sort of facilities, which we'll be hosting. I don't know if we are yet, but obviously we will be as that becomes the done thing. The power demands on that are huge. And there's a question of, well, do we want to stop facilitating that and say we've had our fill? We actually have a domestic population to take care of first and foremost. Only so much economic growth is necessary. At a certain point, it's diminishing returns. Or do we say, no, let's be a high value added economy. Let's have all the servers in the world. Let's be high tech and developed. But if we're going to have that, what are we going to do for energy? We pump in our gas and oil through like one or two pipelines and shipping. We don't really produce much of it. We have a hitherto anyway had this kind of green regime. It's always there of banning extraction of our own domestic fossil fuels. And so if we're going to have this kind of stuff, should we have modular? It sounds pie in the sky, but should we have modular nuclear facilities? I mean, long run, like, is that a way we could actually run a society that works well and milk all of this AI data center stuff to its maximum, get the most out of it? How would we get the most out of it as opposed to just being passengers or whatever? Like, do we own this country, and can we sort of have a discussion about how to? I think of the likes of Peter Ryan. He's an Irish American. He talks about a lot of this stuff. Or, I'd love to see him on TV, for example. Lots of people, lots of Theo McDonald, and I'm intentionally mentioning people who they're not radicals. I'm streaming. I've made some, risque tweets and, all of that. I'm talking about suited and booted, professional, moderate, impressive thinkers. Like, have a bunch of these people on these TV shows, spitting out some good ideas, and just having a discussion overall. And I could think of many other people I'd go on, if they ask me, to talk about various issues and have these lively debates and discussions about, like, how do we get the best thing for our country, and so that our standards of living don't just stop getting way worse, but get way better. Never mind Sweden and Norway and Switzerland and Singapore. Let's do way better than that, like way better. Let's figure out a way that we can make energy as close to free as we can, right? I'm not saying we should have free energy, but wouldn't it be great if energy was just really abundant and cheap? Wouldn't it be great if pressure on services was sort of at an equilibrium, where people weren't standing around twiddling their thumbs, or we didn't have big, massive roads that weren't needed, like in Myanmar, in Rangoon or whatever they call it now. Or Tajikistan or whatever, these white elephants, but also we don't want to overload our services, and we want to have a nice stable culture where some foreigners are here and there's an element of multiculturalism, but there's a stability as well and people trust it and all of that. Like, wouldn't it be great if we could sort of have all these things? Why couldn't we? How could we stimulate domestic industry? This is something that's spoken about more these days in outside circles. How would we stimulate lots of domestic industry? What if we were exporting, I don't know, cars or whatever suits the country, suits our sort of comparative advantages and all of that, where we get the most out of it and all of that, as opposed to just being on this multinational sort of tax tit, where you just every year you just import 200,000 foreigners and it just goes on as it is. Like, these discussions could be had, and I've often said, if you're familiar with my streams, you'll probably have heard me say this before, where I want there to be like little boutique discussions in the Sugar Club in Dublin and these venues where you have Peter Ryan and Angela Nagle and Keith Woods, and then you have the equivalent of a like a Sinn Féin type of person. Paul Murphy, I wish he would, but these people are what they are. The equivalents of some sort of far left people, all sorts of people, a real mix of views there, all meeting, having good discussions, and you live stream it, and people can go and have cocktails and meet and fraternize and get to know each other. And all of these strange political divisions where everyone's at each other's throats and tents, they all get dropped, right? Obviously, if people fraternize and mix, you'd realize no one here is trying to go out and kill anyone. We're just earnest, honest people having interesting and fascinating discussions. What's so wrong with that, right? Let's have it. Let's talk about it. The ethno-nationalists who on the extreme end, who say we need a Gael stat, and we're concerned about the exact percentage of Irish demography and what counts as Irish and what doesn't. People have that view. Other people think it doesn't matter. It's a civic thing. We should have a civic identity, and there's people in between, civic nationalist conservatives and liberals who don't get all this. Have all those people and let's have a discussion about it. But that doesn't happen, and all of that, like I say, is by design. So we instead we end up with the RTE panel, like I say, with Paul Murphy and Dustin the Turkey and Rory Hearn having a discussion about how to fix the hospitals or whatever. And it's just like nobody wants to watch it. The only person watching it is the 74-year-old boomer who's sitting there thinking, oh, let's just keep, Fianna Fáil in to steer the ship. So I don't know. Maybe I am rambling. Am I meant to be talking about the elections in specific? Maybe I'll try to. I have some like general notes. One of the things I'll point out as well is that like nothing really changed, and I can be corrected on the data here if I'm wrong. Last Gael, I see you in there. Anyone can correct me here if I'm wrong, but it almost feels like everyone lost share, except for the Social Democrats. Maybe they got a boost, but of course the Greens got wiped out. And to my mind, anyway, the Greens and Social Democrats are more or less interchangeable. Same kind of stock. The YIMBY crew, like I say, we're not crazy far left. We don't have the kafayas on and the sort of Leninist weird stuff and all that. We're not crusties, but we are pro like LGBT and glass box buildings and green energy and Teslas and all whatever, all that kind of brand. And we're the good guys. We're manifesting positive change, and that's who we are. To me, I just see that class of people, that little slice of society, the student union crew, sort of, as interchangeable. Green, Social Democrat, potato. And someone says Labour are up double. I'm not sure how they quite fit into that narrative I just put out there, but I suppose I would kind of just slot them in there too. Maybe I don't really know much about Labour or how to typecast them exactly. But yeah, I think they all kind of slot into a vaguely similar box, perhaps. But yeah, Labour, Social Democrats up, Greens down, sort of a little balance there between them, much of a much. Or sorry, I don't know if I phrased that right. All of those, two of those up and Greens down, finding an equilibrium ultimately, more or less. And then Fianna Fáil, I think, are up slightly, but Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael combined might be down, or they're about the same. Maybe I should have this off the tip of my tongue, but and Sinn Féin, I believe, are down. They might be up some seats, but down some overall percentage. Again, this is all in the weeds a bit, but let's just call it a sort of let's split the difference and say it's just a kind of a stasis, really, is the like overall thing there. But funnily enough, and I think independence, like sort of apolitical, like the broad independent thing, just random Michael Healy Rays or whatever, Lowry's and all that. I think they might be up or down slightly, doesn't matter, more or less the same. Again, generally a stasis. And for all the talk about nationalists, so-called far right and all of that, getting such a wipeout and such a failure or whatever, it seems to me that nationalists, the kind of everything from, and I don't count Independent Ireland myself, but let's kind of count them. They're kind of seen that way. They kind of present themselves that way, as do Ain too. Everything from them right over to the other, right? Irish Freedom Party, National Alliance, some independents. Take Philip Dwyer, for example, ran like not with those, but he's kind of that, or other. There are lots of people around the place who some did better, some did worse, whatever. But just that whole like world a little bit. Take a very different candidate again, Nick Delahanty. He's kind of like pro-entrepreneur, sort of that type of thing. I don't think he's some sort of dyed-in-the-wool nationalist. I'm sure he would agree with that. But he sort of talks about certain hot-button issues. It's a broad spectrum, but in a way. And it's unofficial, and, again, it's diverse, right? But that other category, broadly nationalist, populist, whatever, sort of including Independent Ireland, but not really. That category, as far as I know, rose quite significantly. I should have this one up in front of me. I don't, but it grew. Maybe I do actually. No, I'll speak in loose terms, right? Not exact figures, but first, yes, the overall share of the vote was low. Nobody got elected as a TD, etc. But if you're speaking in growth, up or down terms, versus 2020, the vote share, I think, is probably tripled or somewhere like that. And you could say, well, it tripled from basically went from tiny to still small, right? Yeah, and no one got elected, yeah. But if everybody's looking around at, are Fine Gael up or down versus last time? Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, and Sinn Féin, and this and that. Well, yeah, you have to look at these things in relative terms as well. Because yes, obviously, Fianna Fáil topped the polls, did very well, but we have to look at the directionality as well. And the directionality, of course, for, let's just say, nationalists this time, was like probably the only remarkable thing. If you agree with me that Greens, Social Democrats, and Labour are sort of much of a much, and what Labour and Social Democrats gained, Greens lost, and there's a bit of a trade-off between those things, and Greens paid for being the scapegoat of the previous government. So it's kind of all the one. Then the only significant change, up or down, to be seen in the entire election, really, albeit in absolute terms small, the only significant relative change is of what you would call nationalists, who doubled, tripled the vote. So you could say that's scant consolation, and it kind of is. And I kind of believe the whole thing, the whole democracy is in sort of a little bit of crisis anyway. And if you're speaking from a nationalist point of view in terms of fixing all the problems in the country and with the rapid rate at which they're happening, well, if you were to believe that, then you would say, well, even if we got 5 TDs elected this time, or 10, well, that wouldn't make much difference anyway, because of course you'd still be, whatever it is, 70 short of having a government, right? And how much would have to happen from A to B, or from A to Z there? What sort of impediments, or, would they ban it from happening? I don't believe we're going to exclusively vote our way to a point where some sort of purely nationalist government totally grabs the reins of this problem, and that's it, and that's problem solved. There's no world where, for example, this election, let's say this is obviously in hindsight, and even with foresight, or before the fact, we would have known this, that something like 5 dyed-in-the-wool nationalists getting elected, that would have been a sort of a fantasist's best case scenario. But even if that happened, of course, day 1 or day 20, nothing would change. Of course, that's not enough to change the actual government. So it's kind of it's much of a much, really, in the sense of, you go, oh, well, okay, so they double, triple their vote share, but that's not a positive thing, because what's that going to achieve? And it's sort of it still leaves you out in the cold. It's sort of like, well, yeah, 5 TDs like would have left you in the cold as well. But then someone might respond to that, well, no, you would have 5 TDs and it would demonstrate your growing influence. And again, I come back to the fact of, yes, it would in a very, that would be amazing. But if growing influence is your metric, then, well, then you still do have that. Maybe not satisfactorily, but you still have growth, right? And I don't know who would call that a sort of a cope, perhaps, but I just don't see it that way. I don't know. And this is where we get into like nationalist mentality and stuff. This sort of whole idea of whether you're like red pilled or what is it, black pilled or white pilled, happy or sad or whatever. I saw Ben Scallon post about this accurately, that like, you know, your happiness should not rest on it. It's like the guy who, you know, the football team loses a match and you're like despondent for 5 days or whatever. It's kind of like, of course, like the state of your country matters more than a football match, but at the same time, you shouldn't be sort of pinning your emotional state to particular outcomes, really, either. Like, you know, nor should you have, for anyone who's sort of going, oh no, we didn't get a TD or something. It's like, well, again, a TD would have had positive influence. It would have been very good, but it wouldn't have fundamentally changed anything. And B, it well, what's my B there? It's kind of like that. It's like that. If you have that like depressed, despondent mentality about not achieving an outcome that you didn't quite know what you wanted anyway to begin with before the fact. It's to kind of sum it up in a way. It's like, what did you want exactly? You know, you wanted to get more votes. You maybe wanted to get a TD, and yes, but did you really think it was going to be like 10 TDs in or something like that? No, at best you would have thought, I might have hoped, outside chance, maybe one of them sneaks it. I don't know, who knows? Like, you know, it's hard to say. After the Euros, some people did well. Who knows what the growth would be, where we're at. Maybe one of them sneaks it. Maybe none of them do. Maybe one gets close. Maybe they don't, stuff like that. But those were always the sort of parameters, you know, somewhere there. And the worst case scenario, of course, would have been maybe a repeat of 2020, like the same, like people coming out with 0.2 or something like that, just totally last on the list, irrelevant. Whereas you had, if take for example, someone like Derek Bly in Cork North Central, I think the constituency got 5%. And again, if you look at whatever it was, 5 TDs got in, 20 ran, whatever, you know, he's not at the bottom. 5% of a large constituency like that is significant. You are playing ball there, like, as far as I'm concerned. And I remember 2020 and even maybe 2016, whenever the previous one to that was, I remember people, and this was when like nationalism was so outside of the discourse entirely, you know, so freakishly outside the discourse, and irrelevant. You know, people were running, some headbangers were running and getting, you know, whatever, 0.2% or whatever, just totally embarrassing, obviously, and just not even worth talking about, and demoralizing, because you think, okay, well, electorally, you have no purchase there whatsoever. But if you're getting 5%, that's not kind of irrelevant at all, especially for someone's first run for government for the Dáil. That's definitely not bad. And I'll illustrate that point further. Sinn Féin, I should pull up stats again, but they were, I think it was 1997, I believe it was, they got 2.7% of the vote. Now, I see here in the Nationalists are fractured. There's different candidates and the parties aren't aligned, and there's independents and micro parties and all of this. But if you sum up all the nationalists, and this is excluding N2 and Independent Ireland, this is like the pure guys, right? The total nationalist vote, as done here by, I have it here on X, Dublin Northwest was 9.81%, Dublin Bay North 6.5%, Laois 6.37%. You know, somewhere between, I think someone summed it up as in rural areas, it's 2%, in urban areas, it's somewhere like between 5 and 7%, right? But again, in 1997, Sinn Féin, I believe, got 2.7% of the vote, and I think it was one TD. I think that was the election they got their first TD. And they just kept plugging away at it. I also saw Luke, our candidate from Kilkenny. I just think of him as Luke O'Connor. Yeah, there we go. I was forgetting his surname, but Luke O'Connor in Kilkenny, if you want to find him on X, he put up a good post about talking about Roderick O'Gorman, who was previously Minister for Children and all of that. He spent the last 20 years running in elections, basically. I think his first time he got 1,000 and something. The next time he actually got like 600. He went down 600 votes. Now, bear in mind, just take Derek Bly as another example. He got something like between 2,500 and 3,000 votes, right? Many others like that, Gavin Pepper and you name it. Elaine Mullally in Laois did very well, similar kind of results. These are people who ran their first time. They're not connected really to parties. They have small parties, but they don't have any big backing at all. They don't get on the media. They don't get a fair shake. They only get demonized and harassed. And they came away with, your 5% somewhere there. Whereas your man Roderick O'Gorman, who ended up being the minister, he was getting 600 votes, right? And he went up and down, and then his kind of time came and all of that. And that's with all this backing that he would have naturally, student union stuff and gay stuff and whatever, this whole like lobby he'll have behind him. And the Green Party, this is a global franchise basically. So the idea that you would sort of come away from an election like this because you had whatever preconceived vague notion you had of what you might have expected, you sort of come out and you go, I didn't get my TD, I didn't get my nummies or whatever. My team lost the match or something like that. It's kind of like, well, you're obviously not seeing it clearly then. Like, obviously getting 5% for some of these candidates under the circumstances is quite good. And the same people who would say, no, that's just cope. No, let's just be doomers about it or something. It's like, well, okay, you can take that attitude if you want and say it's all a waste of time. The democracy is going nowhere anyway. And I agree that's not exclusively going to fix anything or bring any light to the situation by itself. No, not by itself. But, if you say you keep plugging away at it and you don't even get it the next time, but let's say the time after that, it follows some sort of Sinn Féin, Roderick O'Gorman-ish type, as I've described, trajectory. Well, like, they'll say, well, Ireland's going to go to hell in that time anyway. We don't have time or whatever. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. It's kind of like, okay, we don't have time. So what are you going to do about it? The electoral, basically having a positive outlook on the growth. Like, it's not a deluded outlook or just a cope outlook. There is actually real grounds for positivity if you want to see it that way. Like, it's not having positivity for its own sake. It's seeing real facts and recognizing the positivity in them, as opposed to sort of just totally choosing to look at it the other way, and just kind of leaning into some sort of depressive attitude on it. It's like, okay, so plugging away at it for the next 20 years, right? Basically, consistently, and at the same time doing other things, live streaming. What does live streaming do? I don't know, right? I don't know. People discuss ideas and they do, how's that going to save Ireland now? I don't know. Right? How's doing this, scratching your way up through the electoral thing going to save Ireland? I don't know. Even if you got 10 TDs, how's that going to fix it? I don't know. These are hard problems, right? That's the nature of it, obviously. But what I do know is that in 10 years, I would much prefer to have 3 or 4 TDs in the Dáil, the likes of Derek Bly and Luke O'Connor and Elaine Mullally and whoever else you take your flavour, right? I'd rather have them in the Dáil than not have them in the Dáil. Will that solve everything? No. But I'd rather have them in there, and it's a slow climb and it's hard graft, and so long as it's moving in the right direction, that's good, and I support it. And someone else then who says they want to start a cultural movement and open a theatre a bootleg, like a speakeasy theater type thing for cultural growth and this and that. Someone brings that to the table, I would say, hey, sounds like a good idea. Go for it, right? Is it going to solve everything? No, not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily what someone would propose. That's not necessarily the promise of that thing, but it's a good thing, and it's not at the expense of, for example, electoral politics. Go do your theater thing. That's very good. And people out there, people like who want to put their nose to the grindstone, like Derek and others, God bless them. They're doing it, and they're doing a good job at it too. And I wouldn't doubt them in the next couple of elections. They go from 5%, next thing they're getting 8%, next thing they're getting 12% or whatever, and next thing they're getting a seat. And suddenly that's very powerful and very impactful. You can pick up the phone and talk to them. You can push an issue into the Dáil. They have Dáil immunity. They have this and that access, and it complicates matters politically for the regime, and that's a good thing. And I want that, right? And it's kind of like that person who says, yeah, but I want it now. And I kind of go, oh, I want it now too. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff I want. I want lots of things, but of course we have to live in the reality that it is. And then other people say it's sort of like people will go from 2 days before the election, they're sharing memes and having a great time posting online, and it's all lovely, and we're all giving out about everything. And we're happy going along like that. Then the election happens. And there's an attitude of like, yeah, we're going to post our way into, Gaelstad, and we're going, it's all grand. And there's an optimistic mood and stuff like that. And then the election doesn't quite pan out as best as you would have hoped for it. And now it's sort of like the end or something. It's sort of like anyone who has that mentality probably should just pack their bags, and I've often said, go get a hobby. Do not depress yourself with this stuff. It is not worth your mental health. Like if that, and I say this like genuinely, if that is your sort of the tendency you're wedded to, then it is actually better to take like the expat, like move to Kuala Lumpur approach or whatever, at least mentally. Like just go maximize the quality of your life and forget about all this. Because it's not ever going to be sort of jubilation and positivity. Like, there's going to be moments along the way, but it's this slow and steady grind of multiple people doing multiple things, one of which is elections. And you just go for it. And as far as I can see, people made progress. And then, of course, there's lessons to be learned as well. There's loads of lessons to be learned. And there's loads of problems too. The other thing is that people could say there are so many problems, and I would be the first to say it, the extent to which the process is subverted, for example, like, and I'm going to do conspiracy theory here for a second, but some people have pointed out that, well, in some of the most promising constituencies, you had like 6 different candidates running Mickey Mouse campaigns, some good campaigns, but some doing Mickey Mouse, and it just totally shits the bed on the whole situation. And I kind of go, well, funnily enough, actually, it often seems to be some of the most promising constituencies that seem to have that like crazy vote splitting thing happens. I'm not accusing anyone of being a subversive plant or whatever necessarily. I don't know. But what I am saying is that is curious. And theoretically, if I were running a regime and there was this effectively prescribed political movement, unofficially, de facto prescribed political movement, and we were allowing them to take part officially, but of course we didn't want them to make any ground ever. You could easily play tricks because you can run anyone for any election. People speculate about Hutch in the inner city Dublin there against Malachy Steenson. I don't know the answer. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know Hutch. I don't know his communications. I don't know. But of course, it's a fair theory. People say, well, yeah, your man, of course, locked up in special criminal court, all this history, effectively kind of like former criminal turned like former gangster type, turned allegedly, I don't know, turned into like Gombeen. He owned asylum accommodation and he spent his time under the sun in Lanzarote and all that type of stuff. And then he's dragged in and out of special criminal court for these mysterious, strange, alleged crimes. And then he gets away with it. The other guy doesn't. And then his GSOC officer is caught at a party with him after his special criminal court release, or when he gets out of that. And they're at a party, and at some point that officer, I believe, absconds the country. And the newspapers are saying he absconded the country. They specifically say he absconded the jurisdiction, this person who was with GSOC and was formerly, I believe, PSNI, or working with, it's vague, but what I gather is probably that it's PSNI. And when PSNI are down here, the shady shit afoot, including the likes of Drew Harris, we know what the story is there. Turned GSOC, turned going to parties with Hutch, turned this, that, and the other. Then he shows back up from Lanzarote, and the media say, what are you running for? And he's looking at them going, I have no idea, right? And even after the election, the media, who drummed up a circus and gave him all the media attention in the whole world that you could ever ask for, a big hype, look at this outsider, look at this maverick, look at this fuck you to the system character. The media all show up at the airport when he returns from Lanzarote. Somehow 40 different camera people at the airport seem to knew exactly when he was going to arrive at the airport. Okay. And they say, what are you running for? And he says, I don't know, I'm just running, right? And then after the election, when he just about doesn't get it, and of course Maliki then doesn't get it. Ultimately, Maliki might not have made it anyway, but his fate was sealed by Hutch, obviously. They start asking Hutch about what kind of change he would have brought, and he just says, just change. I don't know, just whatever. Like, I don't know. So my answer to that would be, I don't know. I don't read his mind. Maybe he's just running because he really wanted to run. And that's what it was. He just decided, do you know what? I want to be a politician now, even though I have no idea for what or to do what. I don't know. And I don't even pretend and bother knowing, right? But I'm here. What I'm saying is, whether Hutch is this or that, you could do a Hutch. Do you know what I mean? If you were the state, you could easily do a Hutch. You could say Derek Bly suddenly is on the cusp of winning in Cork North Central in 8 years, 10 years time, whatever. He's really like in the hunt. He's like, he's probably going to get the seat. And then what? 2 months before, someone comes out of the woodwork, a Peter Casey type or whatever of Cork, comes out of the woodwork and suddenly has changed their tone. And suddenly they're sounding almost more radical than Derek Bly himself. They're saying, I want to just, deport all the illegal people from here and end the asylum and pull out of Geneva, all this kind of stuff. They start saying all of this, that, and the other, and they either beat him and they do nothing in office after the fact, or they don't beat him, they don't get a seat, but of course he doesn't get a seat either because he totally split their vote, and then he just disappears back into the wilderness. Like, the system clearly is wide open for the regime, which is totally funded to hundreds of millions to combat the far right and all that. There's no limit to what they could do, in that. And again, so you could say, okay, so the electoral thing is bollocks basically, and it's rigged and it's doomed, because how can you overcome a phenomena like that? Well, I don't know. There are lots of reasons. That's why, like, the doomers, I could agree with you in many ways. And then you could say, well, what if Derek and Elaine, what if they do get elected, they won't be able to form a government? And then if they did get close to it, they would all just be assassinated anyway by NATO. La, 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 la. You could go on all you want about all that stuff. But of course, if you want to go down these avenues, then just don't bother, unless you're the mystery man who has the secret plan that you won't tell anyone about. And, you just have faith in, some, let's just do some unspecified thing, like, in reality, you have to just sort of push into the circumstances as they exist. You have to do live streams. I do live streams, right? I'm probably preaching to the converted all the time, basically. Grand. But maybe I give people a different perspective. Maybe that's useful. Maybe someone else I've seen, think about this. I discovered him recently. He's big on TikTok. He does these little short videos. Excellent. So one with little graphics, narrations, brilliant. He's doing a thing. How's that going to solve everything in Ireland now? I don't know, but it's a good thing. All these things are good. All of these moves. And then there's like more granular discussions about people talk, and I don't like reveal, something should be left to chats or whatever, but people talk about the likes of Ain 2. There would be a lot of people out there who say, well, maybe all of this sort of Mickey Mouse micro party headbanger nationalism is just a big drag, right? And I could see people out there going that way. Maybe people who are on the fence, the more moderates, were saying, do you know what? It's time to, and this is one of those things, it's time to jettison that. After the Euros, maybe I thought there was a bit of steam in that, a bit of capital to be gained from that. But maybe now, even if you are a sincere person who wants change, maybe your best bet is to put on a nice suit and be more along the lines of Ain 2, or just independent. I'm not connected to, if you want to put up your graphics of all the nationalists who are running, I'm going to disavow that. I'm not one of them, because to be honest, that's a dead weight. So people might run off to a sort of a centre right and sort of coalesce onto that. And then some are sincere, some are cynical about it, some are opportunists, some are plants, who knows. There's all sorts of endless complication to all of this stuff. The fact that you can't get on TV or get a fair shake, the fact that you're hounded by an NGO media infrastructure into oblivion, the fact that nationalism in a sort of a spoken out way, like, how do I put it? Unfiltered nationalism, where you're not doing a Padder Tobin, you're not sort of coming out and saying, I'm just a guy in a suit. I just, we should mildly control immigration, check passports, but like, I wouldn't have anything more to say. It of course is designed in such a way as, what I mean is the regime sort of system is designed, and the attack on the so-called far right constant is designed to create that effect, to get it to the point where everyone is just a guy in a suit saying nothing really. And it creates a dynamic where everyone wants, and that is the thing, then that can find some success actually, because it gets sort of a fair shake, and so you end up with, let's just attach ourselves to that and experience some growth, and then perhaps we can gain more influence, at least. But of course that can lead to no influence, because at a certain point you just are Fine Gael as well, right? It becomes imperceptible, basically. It's like the thing or whatever. Nobody knows who's who or what's real anymore. And where the people who just say it openly, say their beliefs openly, and are unvarnished and sort of just like the way I tend to do. I'll talk about immigration. I don't couch it or in any funny way. That becomes toxic by virtue, not because it is toxic in and of itself, but because, of course, the regime will attach a toxicity to it, hounded by NGOs, harassed from jobs, all the usual stuff, right? Just constant harassment, basically, and marginalization, alienation, and all of that. That's all done by design. These are all difficult questions to sort of reconcile with, and they've always been the way. And it's sort of like, I could have told you that last month, and I would tell you that in a month's time. These are all thorny problems, and you're basically a North Korean or whatever, to use them as a cliche sort of example. You're sort of like a North Korean and two guys who like don't like the Kim dynasty or whatever, and you don't like how it's run, and you're out the back of a warehouse somewhere smoking a cigarette, and you're both talking about like how you're going to overthrow it, like, and then you get into an argument about it because neither one of you has the best answer. It's kind of like there's a strange, sad futility in that in a way, but it's kind of like that's the phenomenon that arises, and it's particularly acute. I've been around the game long enough to see this, when it's especially around elections, which are kind of like just an X factor phenomenon, really. Like the consequences of these things aren't going to be drastic anyway, either way, in the grand scheme of things. But because people go, well, obviously we would like a TD, or we'd like someone to get very close or whatever. When your song contest doesn't go quite how you wanted it to, all of these sort of frustrations and contradictions and limitations and oppressive, how do I put it? The consequences of being in that oppressed under a state start to sort of bubble over, and people get very irate and demoralized. But of course, in a week or two, people will forget and move on, and they'll be the next people will be back to the content scroll and all that, and people will have forgotten their short-lived depression and be back to it. But of course, the people with the best attitude, I believe, are the people, the optimists and the grafters. And I wouldn't even count myself as one of them. I just do streams. I'm not the guy, right? But there are people out there who are more like they are the guy. People who, and I meet them and I talk to them, who are sort of behind the scenes trying to just get shit organized, really come up with ways to unify the shit show of different parties, try to figure that out in some ways or others, trying to form coherent policy platforms, manifestos, all of this stuff, trying to figure out how to micromanage all of these consistencies, how to play the Gambine game as it is. That's another, I could talk about this, but I won't go on much longer. But the funny way Irish politics works, where Helen McEntee objectively failed as a minister for justice. I mean, guards leaving, prisons overcrowded, people walking into the country willy-nilly without passports, crime rampant, state losing control of Dublin city centre, a big thing that was, just generally cities getting dangerous. There's no, it's not a partisan take, it's just an objective thing. As a minister for justice, it was just an absolute disaster. She was just a woman in a sort of how would I say, she was like a style queen, the woman in politics or whatever. She had that kind of, the media created that thing for her, and she's also a little local darling in Meath East, in that way that Irish politics is parochial. So in spite of being a terrible minister for justice, she gets elected in a resounding victory by her constituency. So Irish politics is tragically pathetic in that sense. But there are people out there who are sitting down going, yes, it is. But instead of just being sad about that, let's try to figure out how to hack that. How do you hack that without totally losing your message? You keep your message, but you sort of somehow play with that. To me, it's nauseating. The Helen McEntee, Michael Lowry, all that stuff, the way the game has to be played, nauseating. I hate it. I wish we could just have robust discourse and put our message across and all that. I believe that should be sufficient, but we don't get that. We live in this Gambinocracy. So there's people out there trying to figure out how to play that game with the goal of getting some TDs in the Dáil, which won't solve all the problems. But having a TD in the Dáil is massively more powerful than not. It centralizes nationalism, as I said before the election. It incentivizes and normalizes nationalism to achieve these little things. And that's why they're so delighted about so-called far right not getting a TD this time, because of course the whatever you call it, the regime, the far extreme left, whatever, they recognize the power that would have. It wouldn't change the government, but it would normalize and incentivize nationalism, as opposed to sort of keeping it in its box as a toxic brand. Not toxic because people feel that way about it, but toxic because it's like if someone out there, you live in New Jersey and you're Tony Soprano's worst enemy or whatever. It's not about you don't like that person. Maybe you think that guy is nice or whatever, but it's hard for you to be seen with him. It's hard for you to do any favors for him because that's going to be very bad for you. You certainly don't want to be also getting on Tony Soprano's bad side or whatever. It's that kind of phenomenon. Even if Tony Soprano is wrong about that guy's great. He did nothing wrong, and Tony Soprano's actually the bad guy himself. Yes, but I can't be seen with you. I can't, I just can't. That's the attitude. And that's how that sort of branding happens. And, that it's a multifaceted thing. People out there making media, changing minds bit by bit, with whether anything from a TikTok to a guy in a suit presenting the arguments very mildly, to street activism, to getting TDs in the Dáil. TDs in the Dáil is huge. It's just massive. And it will happen eventually. If it sooner or later it will happen, but the quest is extremely important, and just because it hasn't happened this time, that's not a reason to become depressed or say, oh, it's all bullshit. It's like, no, like, oh, they're just filling up the country with foreigners and replacing the Irish and all that. It's like, yeah, no, I know that, but I mean, they'll be doing that whether you get back to the grindstone and for to try and get someone in next time. Like, all those bad things that you're talking about happening will happen whether you pursue it or not. And you might say, "Oh, you're pursuing it in vain" or something. It's like, maybe, but definitely those things will happen anyway. Those things are happening anyway. So it's just about, are you going to do something about it in small ways that might seem like on their own futile, or are you not? It's very, to me, it's very much just a question of disposition. I don't know, because again, like Ben Scallon said, I don't place my personal happiness in small outcomes such as some election or whatever it might happen to be, a week to week thing. The Irish Times said immigration is a concern for 90% of people this week, and next week they'll say it's 62%. Well, I'm not going to be delighted on the first one and sad and despondent on the second one. It's like, no, these things are complicated, The other thing too is that immigration. Speaking of polls, I think 6% of the electorate. I hope I'm not wrong here. I might be wrong. I don't want to speak to it if I'm wrong, but there were polls about immigration anyway, and I saw some regime far left people try to describe it as immigration wasn't the top issue. It turned out that housing, healthcare, maybe housing, cost of living, something like that was top, and then like right underneath those generic things was immigration, above the likes of childcare and stuff like that. So the people who are trying to say, "Oh, immigration is not important," like it's not the number one issue, it's like, well, no, obviously childcare is a big issue for a lot of people in the country. Clearly, very normal issue that people talk about a lot and has glaring problems to it. So if that's an issue, immigration is like 3 times the issue that is, according to the stats. It's certainly like 3 times more of an issue than climate change is. So the issue remains extremely relevant. That didn't change at all with this election. This idea that is both pushed by, let's call it the far left or the state, this idea that this election was a rejection of nationalist ideas, right, is both patently factually untrue when it's said by critics and when it's said by believers of it, right? As in nationalists who sort of have internalized the idea that this is some sort of crushing defeat or rejection. It's not true when either person says that. The facts are what they are. Immigration, by any metric, even when exit polled from the actual voters themselves, remains an extremely important and we'd call it popular issue. That's just a fact. You could say, well, how could that be when no TD got elected for an explicitly nationalist party or whatever? Well, there are complicated reasons for that. How does Helen McEntee get elected when she did a terrible job because she's, a little sweetie in her community and grew up and probably kissed arse left, right, and center her whole life in just the right ways, and kind of, that's just what it is now. And she comes from this political family, and locals vote parochially, and Michael Lowry and the Healy Rays and all that. It wasn't really anything to do with immigration as an issue. It might be to do with the two things: how nationalist electoral, how candidates and parties ran, right? They could, and most of them will say themselves, "I'm learning lessons, I'm moving on to the next time," or whatever. But like, the lessons learned, oh, well, I did this and that and the other wrong. And then the other thing, of course, is just the nature of it. Like I mentioned, the oppression from NGOs, the blackout from the media, basically, the parochial nature of Irish politics, and those things all intermingle. These things are facts. The vote splitting, the potentially subversive stuff potentially from the likes of Hutch or whatever, all of these phenomenon, basically the immutable shutout from the state, right? That isn't just something we talk about and say, oh, the state are against us and NGOs. No, that's a big, massive brick wall that's just in front of you, and there's no good way of climbing it. You try and chip away at it or have a little go here and there, and you do what you do, but you don't, when the wall is just towering over you, you don't sort of bitch and moan and cry and say, and the five of you who are trying to get over it start fighting with each other or getting, Lord of the Flies about it. No, you just recognize that this is a very big wall. It's a tough prospect, right? It's not our failure. Why can't we walk those 10 steps forward? Because there's a massive barbed wire brick wall in front of you. That's why. And it isn't there for the Social Democrats. It's not there for People Before Profit or Fine Gael, obviously. And so all of these factors explain it. It's a mix of the immutable fact of that, but also there's an element to which you could tweak and improve. And then the third element is just time and inertia, of course, because and that's where the positive comes in, where 2020 was like a bit of a bust, and then 2024, no TDs, would have taken a few higher percentage points, ideally, from the candidates, even who weren't elected. Like, it was a few percent less than I would have liked, and a lot of us would have liked, but doubling, tripling vote share, right, somewhere there, albeit still small in an absolute sense. But that's definitely the right direction. And to come back and do that again the next time, of course, would put you toward contention for a seat. So, that's just that anyway. And it's kind of like so my point is that it's not some sort of rejection of nationalism. So if you thought Ireland is all about immigration at the moment, it's a hot button issue, we are sort of speaking to that, and doing so effectively. Look at all these Newtown Mount Kennedys and all of these things. Like, these things were from the media, cultural, political space, nationalist content creators or posters or activists, all sorts of people have done a terrific job bringing these things to the fore. And it's kind of like people think, oh, well, because the election wasn't quite as good as you might have wanted it to be, that stuff is all out the window. It's like, actually, it's not, we didn't do as good as we thought or whatever. It's like, no, it is the issue is at the foreground, and it's because of people pushing it. The election is a sort of a different story. I mean, it's a complicated thing. Why do Gombeans keep getting elected? Why did Helen McEntee get elected? And to speak to that point, I mentioned climate change. Critics will say, oh, well, you didn't get a TD or whatever. You didn't get the best outcome you might have wanted. So you've been rejected. And of course, the NGO people will push that to kind of demoralize. And it's like, okay, so you're saying that the election result was suboptimal, so it's now irrelevant, despite it polling really high, everybody being against immigration effectively, or like the majority in the country. I see here 55% of Sinn Féin's own voters. Somehow Sinn Féin did very well, like relatively speaking, did well, like their top three, or second. They came second in the polls, and their own voters have a majority who are against immigration, and yet immigration isn't an issue. How does that make any sense? Also, if a somewhat perceived, at least suboptimal outcome was reason for an issue to just be taken off the table, you're irrelevant now. You can't even speak about immigration because you didn't take over the government or something magically. Well, if that's the case, then the state can just take all of the climate change stuff and throw it in the bin. It's been rejected. So all of the carbon taxes, all of the HR stuff, all of the little lectures people get in secondary school and primary school and college about climate change, and however many hundreds of millions are there for climate change NGO activists, full-time salaries to work on this stuff all the time, green this, green that, whatever, CO2, whatever. Like I say, the policies for farmers, the policies on diesel and petrol and taxing, certain cars and all that, more, whatever, all that can just go in the bin because it's been rejected. Well, no, that just gets pushed by the state regardless, right? Nobody is in favor of that stuff. Climate change only has the support of like 1% of the population versus, multiple times that of immigration. But we're going to go hell for leather on climate change. But immigration is apparently irrelevant because naysayers want to frame it that way. It doesn't make any sense. There's nothing to that at all. Take another example is someone like Carol Nolan, right, in Laois Offaly, I believe. She is an independent. She was Sinn Féin back in the day, one of these people who left because she's pro-life. She left, and in the last year or two, she's been this kind of firebrand in the Dáil talking about immigration, and she's actually been much more sort of on the nose than the likes of a Pater Tobin or something, right? Or one of these people. She's actually been satisfactory. Her rhetoric, at least, is not tepid. She comes straight out with a lot of it, right? Maybe not a purist might not be satisfied, but objectively speaking, she sort of paints it like it is. She's had quite a few impressive speeches in the Dáil about immigration. And she, I believe she topped the polls. She did very well anyway. She certainly got elected very strongly in her constituency. So, I mean, if immigration was not, if the takeaway is that immigration has been rejected or something, how did she get elected? I mean, that's what she would be most known for. Yeah, she'll talk about farmers and this and that and the other thing, but in the last few years, I think she would be most known nationally for her rhetoric on immigration. So she got elected very strongly because, of course, why she got elected, regardless of the issues she took on immigration or anything else, is primarily because she has, albeit very different politics, she has the same draw in her constituency that Helen McEntee has. And she was able to build that up over time before she got hardcore on immigration by being just a local darling, I suppose, for a long time and being normal and getting in there. And because she sort of jettisoned Sinn Féin, then went on another few years as maybe a more like a milquetoast independent. Now she's locked into the constituency. Well, now she could more or less say anything, and she could probably still walk into her seat every election because she's in now. And that's kind of like how Irish politics works. I don't really like that that's the case. I don't like it when it's McEntee. When it's Carol Nolan, I like it a bit more. But objectively, I don't really like the phenomenon. I don't think it's a healthy way for a political system to work. But it is the way it works. And there you go. You know, other nationalist candidates who didn't make it did not make it because of their rhetoric on immigration. They didn't make it because the way the system is, they're not quite a recognized face yet, and all of that. And of course, they have the media exclusion and all of that too. So all these phenomena are at play, and it's just kind of about getting around all that and playing the game and getting there. And the thing I find funny is the reason I didn't talk about this for 2 days or didn't post or anything is because I saw the sort of screws starting to pop out of people's heads in the immediate aftermath. And all sorts of competing factions, of course, because there might be one party doesn't like another party, or one Twitter personality doesn't like another one, or there's some beef or some Lord knows what competing interests or whatever going on, and suddenly the daggers start coming out and flying and all of this. I personally don't like any of that shite, and I know a lot of it can be emotional and sort of just petty or cynical, and so I rather just let the dust settle and try to look at it a little bit objectively, not get kind of caught up in the whole thing. But I'll just see if there's a few more quick points there. I just want to kind of get it out. I'm just going to literally rapid fire. Yeah, Sinn Féin got first single TD elected in 97, hitherto under media embargo from Dublin. Yeah, so there was this Section 31 thing. I wasn't really aware of this actually. It's a whole other. I might write an essay on this, unless one of you want to rob the idea and do it first. Which is Section 31. Sinn Féin were under that, which was basically a total media embargo. They literally couldn't speak in the media in Ireland. This was Conor Cruz O'Brien, all these people introduced it. These sort of Atlanticist types or whatever. They had this law, I think, introduced in the 60s or 70s, somewhere there, and Sinn Féin were under that. And although they were a legal political entity, they couldn't actually, they were under basically absolute censorship. They couldn't, on national airwaves, speak. Even if they were coming on to talk about gardening, they couldn't speak on the media at all. You couldn't even take something that a Sinn Féin person had said and read it on the media. Like you have it on a piece of paper, you say, I'm going to read what he said. Not allowed, right? It was actually, you could repeat what they said in the north of Ireland, and you could repeat it in Britain, but not in Ireland. You couldn't even repeat what they said. It was so censored. So Sinn Féin were under that, and I believe that that's worth studying, the Section 30, because it's mind-boggling, right? It's bizarre. But the way I see it is that Sinn Féin got nowhere under those circumstances, and there's a lot more to it too. They were harassed, they were hounded by guards and thugs and all sorts of stuff, right? And when I hear that, I kind of go, well, that rings familiar actually, because we're not under Section 31. In theory, yes, we can go on X and we can run in the election and we can, in theory, get on a local radio station maybe. So there's not a blanket ban, but I believe we have a modern version of that basically, and I think there's direct comparisons probably to be drawn. But with Section 31, and like I say, that was lifted I think in 1994, and then in 1997, with that lifted, Sinn Féin suddenly got 2.7% of the vote and one TD in. Right now, that's Sinn Féin with all their backing and American money and legacy and all of that, and their prowess in the border counties and of course. So obviously they're starting from a strong position there in a way, but they were able to get 2.7%. Now I can imagine a lot of Sinn Féin hardcores at the time were saying, "Oh, we're totally fucked. Oh no, we only have like a few percent. No one's voting for us." And then Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the rest of them, and Conor Cruz O'Brien and all of those were saying, "Oh, what a bunch of losers. They only got one. They've been totally rejected. We took the boot off the neck of Sinn Féin, and they can get one measly TD in with all that power that they have and all that grassroots support they allegedly have, and all that claim to Irish nationalism. They can only get one TD and 2.7 measly percent of the vote, right? Nationally, compare that to in some constituencies in Dublin, where the overall vote was close to 10% for Nationalists, where the likes of Derek Bly are getting 5%. Sinn Féin are getting 2.7% of the national vote in 1997, with 3 years of the boot lifted off their neck. They're still in the total doldrums, obviously, outsider, less relevant than people before profit, a ragtag bunch of whatevers. And look at where they are now. And yes, they've sold out and all of that, but it just demonstrates the potential for having a broader horizon and looking at things over like a multi-decade sort of a timeline, as opposed to the a couple of days having like emotional ups and downs. That's where Sinn Féin were at. But I want to look into that more, because there really is something to be said for, well, I'll caveat, this is not an excuse. I think people should go to the drawing board and do the work and all of that. There's no point making excuses. All boomers are selfish. The electorate are retarded. The system is rigged. La la la. Those aren't reasons to not plug away at it, but it's okay to talk about them as well. And what I will say is that the sort of whole NGO infrastructure, the media firewall, and all of that, and the harassment, the Antifa stuff, random people showing up in masks, that's not Antifa. That's like 1 or 2 degrees separated from the state, sort of paramilitaries basically, right? That stuff, like you saw with the National Party thing in Fermanagh, like that's paramilitary state activity basically, just 1 or 2 degrees separated. The guards beating the shit out of people at these demonstrations in local communities and the rest of it, the surveillance that we don't even know the half of, the 500 different far-right monitor people for the state that openly talk about what they do and the salary they get from the state, and we know the whole gig on that. But like, sometimes we underestimate how similar that is to the likes of a Section 31 environment, where and I want to be specific about this, and I've said it before, but it is military grade, and I say that very specifically. Like, when people say military grade, sometimes they mean it's like a figure of speech, like military grade spicy chicken wings, right? Like a thing to say something is very strong or whatever. I don't mean it like that. I mean it very pointedly, like it's in a military sense. Like, take for example Section 31. The idea, allegedly, it really was just naked, bizarre oppression. But the idea behind that would have been, well, there's the IRA, the conflict in the north. Sinn Féin are sort of like the political wing affiliated to the IRA or whatever. And so we're not going to let them talk, and we're going to harass and hound every member, even if they're total totally peaceful, and they're very open about it, even though technically their party is legal, or else they'd be in jail and prescribed. They are legal, but we're just not going to allow them to talk, and we're going to harass and hound them and vilify them left, right, and center. Even though they just are ideas people, they're just speaking ideas and political ideas. That obviously is not just a little bit of censorship or a little bit of cancel culture or a little bit of politicking between opposing factions, or one government is sort of a little bit snippy at the opposition. It's not like that at all. Like when you're into that kind of territory, when you're into the state having dozens, hundreds, who knows how many so-called far-right monitors who literally record and watch and document every single thing you do, and the likes of it. And if you get a job in McDonald's and they find out about it, which they easily can, they'll have it so that you can't flip burgers and you can't do this and you can't do that. And the media come out and say, this guy didn't pay his taxes 10 years ago and this, that, and the other, whatever. This whole thing, this whole smear operation, Zersitzung, the Stasi called it, right? I've probably mentioned that before too. Like that is a military grade thing, and it's no surprise that Sinn Féin got nowhere and were totally blackballed until 1994, and then they took the boot off. And there's other stuff to do with the Good Friday Agreement and Sinn Féin moderating and selling out and all that. But ultimately, they took the boot off, and then suddenly Sinn Féin could kind of get the foot in the door a little bit, and then they grew from there. It illustrates the point of, like, if you're navel gazing a bit about the difficulty of advancing nationalist politics, because of course we've won the argument. That's the thing. Regardless of these elections, everyone knows the argument's been won. People are afraid to say it. I can go out on the street and have a conversation with someone openly about climate change, about the weather, about Micheál Martin, about turf. Oh, they're banning turf. That's mad, isn't it? Or these recycling machines are crazy or whatever. We can talk about whatever. But if you say, what about the like 200,000 odd people that are coming into the country? It's mad too, isn't it? I mean, I agree. The bottle machines are crazy. And why can't we already have a recycling bin? Like, it makes no sense. It's crazy what this government are doing, isn't it? You go, yeah. You go, do you know what else is crazy? I think the bringing in like 200,000 people to the country like annually when people can't get gas and stuff. Isn't that kind of mad? And people are like a bit afraid, you know. If you're with a trusted person or you're getting on well, you might start talking. You might really come together on it. But initially, there's a big fear, right? Now, why would that be, right? You don't have to hate anyone to say that that's the case, right? It's perfectly normal, obvious observation to make. And yet people are afraid. Like, you will see people on camera being interviewed about it, normal people in communities, not activists, who like clam up when the news asks them and they sort of say their point and they're terrified. This is the environment we're living in. This is like military grade oppression. And that doesn't happen to, I'm afraid to say, Paul Murphy or any of them. They don't have any of that to deal with. And they're equally low. Some of them got TDs in because they're better organized with their vote splitting, and you know, they have more funds or whatever, and they have every student union behind them, you know, which are effectively state organizations. Irish Git made a video on this. He was talking about how, you know, the exclusion, everything I'm talking about now basically, but he said, you know, it goes right down to your tidy towns and your local Facebook group. Like, these things are managed by local operators, and you can't just, like, you could go into that and sort of be a PBP with the cafe on and be like, free Palestine, and you could come in and say, oh, I want everybody to wake up early in the morning and be a multinational robot or whatever, like Fine Gael or whatever. And you know, you could bring your sort of flavor to the table a bit in these community things, and like, these are fine. If you brought your nationalist politics just lightly into it, these things, there will be people around. These things are all, the tentacles of the state are kind of in these things a little bit. Something as simple as a men's shed, for example, right? Now, you would think a men's shed should be both fertile ground to sort of network and schmooze a bit politically, not come in with a manifesto, but just get in there and kind of maybe spread your message a little bit, you know, have conversations with like-minded people, maybe about politics. You think Menshed's perfect for that, yeah. Older men and kind of, you know, just Irish men. But of course, they're all heavily NGO funded now, and they will all be doing the asylum seekers are coming over to bake cookies and build a birdhouse, and we're going to go talk about, you know, go to the local school and talk about climate change or whatever it is. Like, and of course, the school then is shot through with it as well. It's like it is through all of these little mundane institutions, but then it's also at the bona fide NGO level, and it's also through the media, and it's through your work, the HR culture. The HR culture will talk about climate change and LGBT and equality and all of that. They never talk about not bringing 200,000 people into the country and how Irish people are basically racially demonized and oppressed, and when they get attacked by foreigners, it's covered up. But when an Irish person insults even a foreigner, it's the end of the world. And, you know, HR don't say that stuff is actually not right. You know, all of this stuff is totally shot through every level. And again, I go back to student unions, like people like the Social Democrats, not through being good politicers or whatever, just because the state has the boot set down in such a way, as they have universities. Bear in mind, these are the brainwashing factories of the state, right? Everyone after 15 years of school brainwashing, you go in for the hardcore stuff in college. You get into college, you're studying chemistry or whatever, but you look out at college and you go, what's the politics going on here? What do people say? What do they believe? What do they advocate for, agitate for? That's controlled. You know, there could be a big faction on the campus who talk about immigration and Irish nationalism and all this stuff, but they're not allowed. You're not allowed. You will be kicked out of the college, basically, right? Or some random person in a mask will conveniently hit you with a hammer or whatever, and then you have to tell the guards that's kind of crazy, and the guards aren't interested. And like that is a military grade oppressive structure. It's not as formalized as the likes of a Section 31 on paper, which is kind of weird that they had it that way. It's just more diffuse, but probably more effective in a way than that. And it has the same results. So I don't know. I think in light of all that, coming away with, you know, in some cases, candidates like someone like Derek Bly, you know, he's pretty open about his views. He's not like couching it too much in some kind of rhetoric. He's a nationalist, right? And he got 5% of the vote in a big Cork constituency under that sort of environment, I think is massive. And the fact that 5% probably, had he ran a few years ago, it would have been 1.2% or whatever. And so that 5%, there's no, even the most doomer person would agree with me that, well, if he got 5% this time, he might not even get TD the next time, but surely he'd get, I don't know, 7-8% the next time, right? I think that would be a kind of good direction. Maybe get, you know, like it's obviously moving in the right direction, and that's a good thing. Okay, I said I was going to do rapid fire. This is obviously not very rapid. I've said a lot of this already, so it's kind of handy. Oh yeah, like you know, the kind of naysayers who were like, oh, you're going. This is a very small section of people online, but you're going to go out and vote. Is it? You're going to go vote like an idiot. People encouraging you to go vote are sort of pipering you into some sort of fake consciousness. You're, you know, something like that. They're promising you that it's a good thing or something, but it's really not. That's some sort of just basically negativity towards the whole thing. I just had here, voting took 15 minutes, not the end of the world. As in, like, so if someone said to me, okay, so you encourage people to go out and vote, but it didn't change everything overnight and no TD got elected, I would be like, okay, yeah. But I mean, you're going to post online for or doom scroll for 4 hours every evening. And what I humbly suggested was maybe take 15 minutes out, whether someone wins or not, just whether it's futile or not. I mean, go do it. It's 15 minutes, you know, and maybe encourage someone else to do it. Like, what's the cost? It's no big cost at all, you know, and just in terms of the voter themselves. So I don't understand how anyone could have a big chip on their shoulder about trying to get people out to vote. And I'm not I know someone like Ain2 has their problems. I prefer people vote for the more radical or whatever, but it's like, I know who I'd be encouraging people to vote for, but if someone wants to go out and vote Ain2 as opposed to Fianna Fáil, yeah. And if they want to vote for Carol Nolan, yeah, good. and if they want to vote for Derek Bly and whoever else, like, all a good thing, and certainly not at the expense of anything. Oh, well, if we want a real radical movement, really basement movement, that's so really pure, then you wouldn't do something as crass as advocate for people to go out and vote for Carol Nolan, because what's that going to do? She didn't even say it right, or something like that. It's like, oh, I don't know, maybe, I mean, you could write an essay about it or whatever, but like, there's no loss to that. Like, might be some upshot, but my point is, like, I don't see what the loss is to these things, like pursuing various shades of electoral gain gradually over time. I just don't see what like, if you have some like genius revolutionary idea, then by all means go for it. My battery is running out. Anyway, so what else? Oh yeah, I had there was this thing, the mainstream media, there was an article by Ellen Coyne. I didn't read it, but I probably have the gist. I wish this was plugged in. It's not. Anyway, it's probably not the time. But yeah, Ellen Coyne and some others, these mainstream media type people, were sort of saying this was one of these demoralization things, I think. But they were doing articles about, like, it turns out the far right didn't actually get a TD, and they sort of underperformed from what they might have wanted and from what our worst fears would have been. So maybe we talk about them a bit too much. And they were kind of saying maybe they don't deserve to be basically monitored, harassed, and demonized as much as we do, because maybe that's in a strange way giving them too much credit. And speaking the we is like a royal we, like we the media, we the government, we the NGOs, we civil society, we whatever, that regime, basically. It's almost like a self-aware we the regime. They're saying maybe we almost lend them too much credence by harassing, monitoring, and oppressing them so much. Maybe turns out maybe they're more weak and impotent than we sort of gave them credit, or we gave them too much credit. So maybe we should back off on that a little bit, because they don't even deserve it, that kind of way. They're so defeated, or something along those lines. And it's just sort of, again, back to your Section 31 vibe, where it's like, okay, so you're admitting that that's what you do. And you're simultaneously saying that this wing of politics in the country is both, I'm taking my moment to sort of gleefully say, ha ha ha, they didn't do well. But at the same time, I'm sort of admitting at the same time that we, the media, we, the power system, effectively, right? We consciously oppress them at every given opportunity, monitor them, oppress them, harass them. We do all of this, put out as much negative content about the rise of the scary, dreaded far right and all of this all the time on the media, through the airwaves. We do that, and maybe they're not doing so well. Oh, sorry, guys. Oh, that's kind of shit. Maybe we won't pay so much attention to you, actually. It's just, to me, it's totally contradictory. It's like, or it's just revealing. It's like, okay, so what you're saying is you put the boot on the neck hardcore. Everyone, like every minor figure that pops up, a little YouTuber, a small little political party, a bigger candidate, whatever, maybe a celebrity like that boxer, Katie, whatever her name is, Kelly Harrington, or John Connors, who did the speech. Anyone who has got mainstream credentials, because they always register that as very important. So any celebrities out there, be careful, because when they lend their voice to what's called far right, or talk about immigration or whatever, the media and the establishment regime recognize the threat that is, of course, because someone who has basically been given social credit is now misusing it, and that's a grave sin and a grave threat. And they get it way harder than someone like I ever would, and they will get like lit up for endlessly in the media until they bend the knee. That's what always happens. Like, so that's one of the things they do. And then some guy who from his spare room does a YouTube broadcast. Next thing, there'll be an article in the Irish Times. They're saying we do all of that on everyone, and lo and behold, they're not doing as well as they might have wanted to, or something like that. it's just mental, like, you know. And I just think it's important for like us to recognize that that's what's going on, you know, here. And again, in spite of that, you still have Derek Bly taking 5%, right? That's not insignificant of the vote in Cork for a fairly unvarnished candidate, like a candidate who doesn't mince his words, let's say. So what else is there? I've kind of said a lot of it, actually. I'm glad, because my battery's going to go. Oh yeah, interesting. Claire Daly and Mick Wallace both sort of just totally flopped. You know, they took their stance on, and they have, I don't know if they're shills or not. I mean, it's a bit gaudy how like Russia and Iran and Palestine focused there. I don't know about them. I don't really care. But the fact is, they are drawing ire from the regime, the central regime. You're really not meant to sort of advocate Russia's point of view, Iran or Palestine or whatever, and they do. And suddenly they went from sort of darlings, like, you know, playful sort of Mick Wallace with his long hair and his funny ways, and Claire Daly is like a, you know, a sort of a, what would you call her, like a leftist agitator or whatever. That's okay, you know. And they were on TV all the time back in the day after the recession, and I just saw, you know, just like a far right, we'll call them, just like that, they got the same treatment the last year or two, and lo and behold, it was harder for them to get elected, wasn't it? Because they weren't given the platform. They were harassed. They were demonized left, right, and center. So, you know, it doesn't just apply to the far right. It's if you're on the wrong side of the central, whatever it is, the central view of the regime, if you're cutting across them on the core issues. So the core issues, obviously the Russia thing, we know, Russia, Ukraine and all that, that's like, you know, you're on under the target or whatever it is when you're talking about that, right? You're really not meant to do that. That's the equivalent of criticizing immigration. Like, you know, where the regime is sensitive and does not want dissent, and it's things like that. And it doesn't necessarily just limit itself to the so-called far right. It's there's a range of issues. Yeah, what else have we got? Low voter turnout. Just interesting. Adamstown, which is basically completely foreign. It's probably the most foreign place in the entire country. Had probably the lowest voter turnout as well, of 29%. Just one of those things. It's like the bowling alone theory. Maybe some Indian will come along and be a candidate and pick up huge votes and get elected there at some point, probably, just like they do in like Bradford or whatever. But for now, the social malaise is most acute in a place like that, of course, because it's just a big bunch of faceless apartments with no, like, basically a fake community. Lo and behold, like, you know, gets the like radically the lowest turnout, because there is no society there. Relates to what I said at the start as well about turnout. But yeah, there's the conversation. Yeah, I've kind of mentioned the fact that there'll be this drift towards the idea of like a very moderate kind of idea free center right that doesn't say anything, and let's all just sort of jump in the car of like the kind of Tory car and hide, and maybe that way we can get in or whatever. I don't quite subscribe to that, but that's a conversation people will have. Yeah, and then just the last thing I'll mention, Adamstown, County Dublin. Someone's just asking me where it is. It's County Dublin. You can look it up. But yeah, the other thing as well is, as regards, has immigration been rejected? Now, the biggest three parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin, over the last 3 or 4 months, they all moved strongly in a rhetorical sense. I mean, they all moved strongly to the right. They're all talking about immigration. They'll you know, they pick and choose their rhetoric. Oh, we need to check passports more. We need to get it under control. Mary Lou says we need to send asylum spoofers only to rich, well-funded areas, but she won't name which ones they are, etc. Simon Harris giving a furrowed brow and saying, I think we really need to get this under control. I think yeah, we need to check people more or something, whatever. They're all doing that. They all did that. And they weren't doing it 8 months ago. They were doing it in the last few months. They all pivoted hard. As I said when I was talking to Keith, there was a poll where Ain2 were celebrating that they came out number one. When people were polled, who do you think is best placed to get a handle on the immigration issue? And Ain2 were saying, look, we're number one on that. they had like a, 22% of people said they were the best maybe on it or whatever. But number two, like with 21% or whatever, was Fine Gael. Fine Gael, who were running the immigration issue and were people, a certain cohort of people thought Fine Gael were going to fix immigration, even though they're in power doing it. Because for obvious reasons, many times I went into a supermarket and I saw a newspaper that says Harris says crackdown needed on immigration, and again, picture of a furrowed brow like that, right? Serious. I'm serious. Like this was all over the papers, and of course I don't watch RT, but I assume the boomers are getting this. The boomers, the ones who vote, and the ones who are feel like they participate in the society and thus go out and vote because they have money basically, and they're not totally ostracized socioeconomically from the society. So they're the big lump of voters, and they're all getting this trash about Harris to crack down immigration. Mary Lou says, we need to get serious or whatever. They played all those games. So it's like, no, they weren't. Like, immigration was far from rejected, because they were all queuing up to see who could sort of sound the most hardcore on stopping immigration. It's just a question of media control. The democracy, the system itself is kind of retarded, and it's kind of run by itself. It runs itself. Like Stalin said something about we count the votes or whatever. We run the media. We sort of decide what people see. We decide which people are demonized and excluded. We do all that. It's like, and then of course people vote for their local Gambine whose face they recognize or whatever. These things are all just like hurdles to be kind of reconciled with. But it said nothing about whether people rejected or didn't reject immigration. It's, in a way, it's kind of sort of totally parallel to it in a certain sense. It's a different conversation. But anyway, I think that's all I have, lads, to be honest. I put down my phone, that's why I had the notes. Couple of super chats there. Yeah, that's all I have. It's late as well. So quickly read out these. My computer has gone into like dark mode. Here, lads, literally can't see it. Fanolo Muraku, thanks. Gives me 5 and says cup of tea and a slice of cake. Yeah, I don't know what that says, but yeah, thank you very much, Fanola, and thanks for joining the stream as usual. I appreciate it. Good to hear from you. James Graves 10. Thank you, says, I may have been born in the USA, but I'm proud to be Welsh, Irish, and Scottish. Hope you are having a great day. Take care. God bless you. That's a lovely super chat. Nice and straightforward. I am having a great day, actually. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's loads of stuff to follow. If you're new to listening to me or you want to follow more stuff, I would say Matt Tracy with Gript wrote a good article to kind of a takeaway from the election. Matt Tracy, Gript election, just search that, find it. It was good. The Flair, I think they're calling themselves, on X, at the Flair News, a sort of new publication that's following Irish nationalist politics and European stuff. That's worth following as well. And of course, again, archiving Irish diversity, I would place first and foremost above those even. First and foremost, go on Telegram, look up archiving Irish diversity. Every take I've mentioned here has pretty much been hit on by him as well. Him, her, them, I don't know. And I'm sure there's loads. The first thing I'm going to do is go check that as well. Some excellent takes have been coming out there. But yeah, that's the election. Like a very quick summation. I think it was kind of good. Like, I would love if a TD had snuck in somehow, like a Patrick Quinlan or one of these. Like, that would have been great. Did I really think that was going to happen? I just kind of didn't know. I thought maybe one of them will. I don't know. Maybe one of them will be just a few percent away. Turned out they were more than a few percent away. What would they have needed? Maybe 10% or something like that. Maybe 9. I'm not sure. But they were a few points down from where they needed to be. Maybe the European elections and the locals are a bit of an easier task for whatever way the elections work. It's kind of easier to play those. But I would say that this is probably the first all election, like national election, where you've seen some candidates run, and you've seen that it's kind of possible. Take your Elaine Mullally. These are people who came out of nowhere, and whether they're too mild for you or they're too hardcore for you, whatever, people criticize it either way. But this broad spectrum of candidates, and I'm not talking about the Mickey Mouse ones, the fucking headbangers and the time wasters, right? I'm talking about like the handful of maybe 10 candidates who you would go, they're serious, they're really serious, they're taking it seriously, and they're playing it like they mean it. Those ones, a lot of them, it was their first time, they have no background, no support, all the demonization, all of that, and they've come away with the likes of a 5%. I mean, to sum up, I don't think that's too bad at all. Like, and I think it's something to build on for the future. So I see another super chat here. Sheepdog €2 says, "Thank you, Garrod. Always a good listen. No bother." Oh, yeah, I hope it's not depressing or whatever. I'd like to kind of talk more casually about these things, but once you get into it, it sort of gets a bit like, I don't know, serious or something, you know. But yeah, might come back soon and do another one or talk about some other stuff. Or maybe I'll just go into hiding for a small while and write that Section 31 essay. Maybe try to get it, use that as a comparison, like a little vehicle through which to view the current. Because sometimes taking a historical precedent that has the hindsight of looking back on it, as a way to compare and contrast to what's currently going on, gives you a way to frame what's happening now almost from a historical, detached, objective, technical perspective. So maybe try and do like not a magnum opus, but like an essay where it's like coherently, fully documented the various ways in which what we would call nationalists in Ireland, and of course this is a pan-Western thing, but the various ways in which there is a serious brick wall up, you know, and it's not just a bit of cancel culture or a bit of woke or whatever. It's really serious. It's really military grade. Like, I think that's worth maybe pursuing. Anyway, I'll leave it there, lads. Thank you for joining me, and mind yourselves, and go to bed. Ewa. See you.